Welcome to the Highland City Planning Commission. We welcome you guys in the community attending and thank the commissioners for coming. We'd like to start our meeting today with an invocation, and I will be saying that, and a pledge of allegiance by Commissioner Abbott. So, thank you. Our dear gracious Father in heaven, we're thankful to be together this night and invite thy Spirit to help us keep an open dialogue, facts straight, and sensitivity to each other's opinions and adherence to the laws that we're required to follow. We ask for collaboration and cooperation and being able to come to good solutions for our community. And we give thanks for this land and this beautiful sunshine tonight, and we say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. We are going to turn the time over to the city as Stephanie, as she's going to read in a new commissioner for us today.
Thank you, commissioners, for letting me spend some time with you tonight. My name is Stephanie Cottle. I am the Highland City Recorder, and I am here to issue the oath of office to Deborah Mon, who is one of our new alternate planning commissioners today. So, Deborah, if you don't mind just coming up with me for a minute. Okay, will you please raise your right hand? And state your name.
Deborah Mon.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support, obey, and defend.
That I will support.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of Utah.
And the Constitution of the State of Utah.
And that I will discharge the duties of my office.
And that I will discharge the duties of my office.
In the Highland City Planning Commission.
In the Highland City Planning Commission.
With fidelity.
With fidelity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. Please come join us up here, and you're on duty. So thank you very much. Okay. Do we have any unscheduled public appearances? If we do, would you please state your name clearly, your address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name is Doug Courtney. I'm a resident of Highland, and I'm here to speak with you this evening in my capacity as chair of the Highland Fling Grand Parade this year. We've got a couple of things that we're going to add into the parade. One of the main ones being a group to come by after the parade and have some trash bags so that we don't leave as much along the streets and along the sidewalks. Part of that is that we need more volunteers in that case. So we're reaching out for volunteers. I'm not asking any of you to volunteer. I won't turn you down if you offer, but I'm not asking. What we are looking for right now, though, is neighborhood leaders who can help us find volunteers. As some of the leaders in the city, I figure that you know a lot of the neighborhood the neighborhood leaders, and so what I'm really asking for is your help in identifying who those neighborhood leaders are who may be able to help us. So I have a handout here for each one of you, just a staffing plan in case you're interested in the details. On the front of it has my contact information. If you think of folks who would be helpful, neighborhood leaders who could help us find volunteers, please get in touch with me. If you don't get in touch with me, then I'll probably be getting back in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We really appreciate help on the committee. Having been a parade chair myself. We all really appreciate all of it is run through volunteers. So, thank you.
I just asked him how many people he's looking for, and 40 is what he's looking for, so that's pretty reasonable.
And some of them can be 12 and older. So, perfect. Thank you. We appreciate that and all that you're doing to help with the fling. All right. Any other unscheduled public appearances? Okay. I am just going to state quickly that when we do have that we are going to adhere to the 3-minute timer when we have public comment. So we need to stick with that so that we can continue on with the flow of the meeting. We want to hear from you. We just need to keep it at 3 minutes. All right, Kelly, could you go ahead and take us to the next thing? Oh, sorry. Approval of the meeting minutes for February 28th, 2023.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of the 28th of February 2023.
And I'll second that.
Can we go through that? Jerry?
Aye.
Yes.
Chris? Audrey, it's a yes? Trent?
Yes.
And Deborah? Yes, thank you very much.
And then may I make a comment about item number 4? So I have a conflict of interest, which I've filled out the proper paperwork and given it to Rob and the mayor. And so I'm going to remove my planning commissioner hat and go sit in the audience for item number 4, if that's all right.
That would be great. Thank you very much. All right. Preliminary plat for Williams View land use. And we're going to turn the time over to Kelly. Would you please represent that for us? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Moore and the rest of the planning commissioners for being in attendance. I do want to, I understand that there are several residents here that are probably here for this application, and we, over the last 24 hours or so, received several emails with questions and concerns regarding this application, and so I do want to address those before going into the application itself. All of the comments that we received had to do with 11200 North, and almost all of them talked about this potential connection right here. As well, I just need to make clear that this application, what the Planning Commission is reviewing tonight, does not have to do with that connection. They won't be reviewing that connection. They won't be approving that connection. That's something that would be reviewed and approved by the by the City Council at a future date. Like I said, it's not being reviewed tonight, nor is any widening of any road outside of, there is no consideration for widening any roads adjacent to existing homes. All we're talking about, all that's being reviewed is for this highlighted parcel right here. And so I just wanted to make that clear that any decision being made on this preliminary plat does not make any impact on that decision, whether or not it's going through. As far as staff recommendation for this application, we are recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this preliminary plat, subject to these stipulations. I'll go through each of them as I go through the presentation. This is the vicinity map, that same parcel, so it's just along 6000 West and here along 11200 North. It's zoned R140 in our zoning map, and in our general plan, it is designated as low-density residential for the land use. This is the proposed preliminary plat. It's flipped, so north is going this way to the left of the screen. The applicant is proposing 14 single-family lots. All the square footage and frontage requirements are all met as far as R140 requirements go. For road and utility access, obviously they're accessing the site from 6000 West and 11200 North, just one road access on each of these streets. There's also a stipulation or a comment that we as staff made to be on the plat regarding, you can't really see it right here, but we're not allowing any access or like drive access for lots 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7 onto 6000 West. So there won't be any driveways coming off of 6000 West. They will be limited to the other road frontages for their drive accesses. This plat also involves a TSSD line relocation. For those that don't know what TSSD is, it's the Timpanogos Special Service District. All of our sewer lines in the city go into TSSD lines at some point. And there is an 18-inch TSSD line in 6000 West. If you've driven along this portion of 6000 West, you may have seen on the east side this big old manhole that kind of sticks out of the hillside. That is TSSD's manhole. And this right here, if you can see this kind of dotted easement line right here, is where the existing TSSD line is. The applicant is currently working with TSSD to relocate this line from being in the middle of the lot to going into the roadway, which provides better access for TSSD and for the city to that line. And that is one of the stipulations that is on this preliminary plat approval, that they continue working with TSSD, that TSSD approves those construction plans. And then if TSSD were to, for some reason, deny the relocation, that there would be an easement provided for where the existing location is, like it's showing on lot 7. Parcel A, so you have these 14 residential lots, and then parcel A is right here. It's a little over 1,000 square feet, and it's meant to be a 30-foot wide sewer easement for that TSSD location, and it'll also acts as a PUE. It would not be city-owned. It would be owned by the developer. And then the other item of discussion is for Lehigh Irrigation. If you notice in the staff report, one of the exhibits or attachments was a tailwater agreement between Lehigh Irrigation, Highland City, and Patterson Development. This is something that is not associated with the preliminary plat, but it is along 6000 West, and so we've discussed with the applicant or the developer to work with him to have it constructed at the same time as his subdivision. This would be a 100% reimbursement agreement where all engineering costs, construction costs, all of that would be reimbursed to the developer by these 3 parties. And I'll just clarify, so Patterson's development will be paying for their entire width of frontage that they have on this Sunrise Farms A. So they're going to be paying for about 50% of that cost. And then the other frontage is split between Highland City and Lehigh Irrigation 50-50. And that, like I said, is already a signed agreement. So all these parties have already agreed to have this cost sharing. The terms and timing of that agreement would be coordinated or worked out with the developer between this potential approval and the final plat. And so timing wise, we're planning on having that reimbursement agreement being brought to the council at the same time that final plat is, and then we can just get going on that immediately. Purpose why we're involved, because it is a Lehigh Irrigation ditch. Typically we wouldn't be involved in the cost of that, but we actually use that ditch for our well number 4 we pump to waste through that irrigation ditch. Currently, the tailwater goes out into Patterson's Longhorn piece, but once they develop that, this is where it is planned to be redirected to go to Dry Creek. And so that's why we're putting the pipe in the ground now while all this construction is being done, so we don't have to tear up a brand new road. As far as citizen participation, we sent out the appropriate public hearing notices because this does require a public hearing by code. And we, so far, I don't think we've received any in the last hour or so, received comments from 10 different residents relating to what I mentioned at the beginning, to that 11200 North connection. So just to explain, on our general plan, we have the transportation master plan that's adopted through the general plan. What I've highlighted right here is 11200 North. In the transportation master plan, it's designated as a 2-lane residential collector with a 66-foot wide right-of-way. And this goes from specifically 4800 West to 6000 West. That's where it stops. This is that cross section that it's showing, so you have 66 feet of right-of-way. Because of that, we understand that the 2 subdivisions directly east of this subdivision were actually developed with 56 feet of right-of-way, whereas everything past that was all developed at 66 feet of right-of-way, compliant with the general plan or the transportation master plan. Understanding that those 56-foot wide right-of-way improvements are already completed, we tried to come up with a reasonable way to still be compliant with our transportation master plan. And so that's what stipulation number 5 is regarding, is the 66 feet of right-of-way. And so the compromise or solution we came up with was to match the 56 feet of right-of-way on this east side, and then about at this halfway point, flare it out to a 66-foot flared intersection at 6000 West. Again, purpose is, well, intersections are important, and with in the general plan at the time, again, it was planned to be 66 feet of right-of-way, and as far as reviewing this preliminary plat, we are reviewing it for compliance with our transportation master plan, and so this is our proposal to meet it as close as we can, with still understanding that we're not going to just put 66 feet of right-of-way right next to 56 feet of right-of-way. It just wouldn't make sense to have a sidewalk here and then a sidewalk here. So that's what we're proposing. And as part of the stipulation, there's also, if you notice, there's this jog here on the northwest side where our city right-of-way jogs out. So the proposal is to have the developer extend their property lines to go along here. So essentially we'd be vacating some city right-of-way to allow their lots to go to the back of the sidewalk. And then essentially we would swap that to allow us to have that full 66 feet of right-of-way for this portion. Now on to trails. Sorry, this is like a complicated subdivision. So in our trails master plan, it actually shows on 6000 from Timpanogos Highway to 11800 showing a proposed main city trail. And so in the beginning of working with our applicant, we were looking at possibilities of a trail being on 6000. If you understand the grading there, it can be a nightmare at certain parts where it's crossing Dry Creek. Currently, we're actually working on an active transportation plan with Alpine. We've hired Horrocks Engineering to help us with that plan and the studies associated with it, and it has not yet been adopted by the City Council, but we are working on it and in the process, and it will tentatively be adopted in about June-ish. And so the proposal in the staff report was, rather than trying to require more right-of-way or put a trail there, in our active transportation plan, the plan for that portion is to have an on-street facility rather than an off-street for active transportation. And for that facility, we wouldn't necessarily need additional right-of-way. So the idea was, okay, let's go forward with this plan that we're working on rather than the one that is currently adopted. And that would be an exception that Planning Commission, the City Council would have to consider and choose to go with or not go with. This is another, so because this is along 6000, the developer is required to provide a 6-foot tall theme wall along 6000 West because it's a major collector. And part of this, obviously, this shows the grading plan, the existing grading, and it is extremely steep when you get to this northwest corner. And so the idea, they obviously need some retaining on this side. So in meeting with the applicant, we came up with a solution to basically, with the 6-foot theme wall that you have coming from Lot 1, all coming up north, right here is where you start needing some retaining. And so we came up with a proposal to transition the theme wall into a decorative retaining wall. And so from 6,000 West, when you're driving, it's going to look like a 6-foot wall all the way, but then once you get to a certain point, it's going to act as a retaining wall. Purpose was just for it to, have that theme wall look all the way along it and look consistent and have a smooth transition. That way we don't have retaining wall and fence on top and just whatever you could come up with. And this was the most aesthetically pleasing idea that we came up with. Again, these are those recommended stipulations. The first 3 are pretty standard, just as we move to final plat, that it's all consistent with our preliminary plat plans. Number 4 is that TSSD stipulation. Number 5 is that 66-foot wide flared and looking at that property swap. And then number 6 is staff coordinating with the developer regarding that Lehigh irrigation pipe construction. And then this is a proposed motion to recommend. Like I said, it does require a public hearing. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. And obviously our applicant is present if you have any questions for him specifically.
Thank you, Kelly. We appreciate that. I'd like to open this up for a public hearing, and then we'll open it up for planning commissioners to ask the questions they would like to. If you would like to make comment, would you please come up and state your name, your address? You will have exactly 3 minutes. If you would please, if you have the same thing to say that someone else has said, feel free to come up and say ditto, and that will be noted and put inside, just to expedite this process and make sure we hear from everybody. This public hearing is now open. Kelly, do we have anyone online? Okay.
No, we do not.
Okay. Thank you. Then I would like to close the public hearing and open it up for the commissioners to ask questions and kind of pick this apart and make sure that we understand it. Chris, would you like to say something? Then please come on up.
Hi, I'm Chris Howden. I live on 11366 North, 6000 West. I am the guilty party as charged. So here's my concern about stipulation number 5. So it's presented...
Kelly, can you put up number 5? The stipulations. Thank you.
It's presented as this has nothing to do with the collector road and the potential of, knocking down the Harris home and their garage and making a connector thing. But the way that it's been presented to me, both verbally as well as in written documentation, is the sole reason for doing the 66-foot is because of the master plan, which calls for the connected road. And so I'm not sure how you can argue for one thing and the justification for that one thing is because it's a collector road, but then at the same time to say to the residents, we would encourage you not to make any comments about it because they inextricably tied together. In the same way, the Patterson subdivision to the west, they weren't required to do a flare-out connection as well. And so I would just ask you if you'd be willing to consider making an exception to the master plan as presently constituted, given the history of a building permit that was issued to the Harrises in 2018 to construct the garage and all of those things, as well as the 2 subdivisions that were encouraged to do 56 feet instead of 66 feet. And then the other thing I'd like to ask for is just to make sure on the stipulation number 6 that that ditch doesn't end in our driveway. If it goes all the way down to Dry Creek, as planned, that makes sense. But I don't necessarily want a 2-foot wastewater discharge with thousands of liters of water that just kind of ends at our driveway. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else? I'll leave the public hearing open. Go ahead.
I just also want to voice my opinion in opposition.
Can you state your name, your address?
Christine Oldroyd, 5656 West, 11200 North.
Thank you.
And I just want to voice my opposition also to requiring the 66-foot wide flared intersection, because we in that neighborhood don't feel like it needs to be 66-foot wide. We don't want it to be a collector street. We want it to stay 56 feet wide and to be a quieter, more residential road. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Scott Oldroyd, 5656 West, 11,200 North. I want to ditto what Chris is saying about why I require him to have a flare of 66 feet when Patterson across the street is not required to. And that street's just, 56 is wide enough. We have enough access to the neighborhoods. We got the light here at 56 and at 6,000. I don't see the need why you would have to flare it out when it's 56 most of the way.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
James Sampson, 5882 West, 12,000 North. We talk about the master plan, and I know that that's from way long time ago, but what did the master plan say about the trail going down 6,000, and what were the plans on that originally? Can you talk about that more and how that, where does that run into on the north and south side? And I'm just kind of curious if I can get more information on what the plan was for that.
Thank you. Good questions.
Would you like me to address that now?
I would love you to respond. Thank
Okay.
you.
So if you can see here, this is the trail master plan. No engineering was completed on it to propose this. It's just designated as a proposed main city trail. It just starts right here at Timpanogos Highway and goes up here and then connects to 11800 where you have that parkway detail, that meandering sidewalk, and then going up along Beacon Hill Boulevard. So it really was just main city trail connection from 11800 north to Timpanogos Highway, if you can see that.
Okay. We're going to close the public hearing and open this up for the Planning Commission to discuss and ask questions, and we'll begin. And I do have a question about the trail, too. It shows that it's kind of going... I just need to understand the trail system in that particular neighborhood, and does it go or connect to anything, or would it make more sense to keep it on 6,000?
Sorry, can you reiterate? Like as in it, the proposed main city trail, typically, with the planned trail systems, it's, when we define trail, it's more of like an off-street facility, like where we have these parkway details with it being meandering sidewalk off of the road. That's what the plan would have been, is off of the road. But like I said, with our active transportation plan, they're looking at both on-street and off-street facilities and giving us different ideas and options for both and giving us recommendations for what type on which streets as they kind of give us a backbone trail network connecting Highland City Trails to Alpine City Trails. And that was a portion that they're, like I said, it hasn't been adopted, but based on the grading and existing homes on that side, they are proposing that portion be an on-street facility.
On the east side of 6,000? Is that what you're saying?
That is yet to be determined.
Oh,
I don't know yet. That's where, when we were first discussing this, and it was before we had found out that recommendation from the engineering firm that we've hired, we were talking with Chris, and I sat down with our city engineer several times trying to figure out if we were to do this proposed Main City Trail, would it be on the east side? Would it be on the west side? What would make more sense? What would cost more money? That sort of thing. And so with the proposal, with it being an on-street facility, it simplified a lot of things, at least from a staff's perspective.
so the sidewalk on the east side of 6,000 has a sidewalk, and maybe not meandering trail, but it's a straight trail. I know because I run it. Is that correct? That's on the west.
On the west side.
On the west side.
Correct.
And
It's
then
just
the
a
part
sidewalk.
that's being developed further south on 6,000, the Longhorn section, is that
It's just a normal sidewalk.
going to have
too.
it? Okay. So that does not count as trail?
No.
Thank you.
It's more, active transportation is meant to accommodate walkers, bikers, equestrian users, just all the works. So more than a 5-foot sidewalk.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't understand what Chris was talking about on the water at the driveway. Is that exposed? Is it a pipe? What's happening right there? Could you just go into more detail on that?
Yes, I can. Okay. So, like I said, we use a Lehigh irrigation ditch for our tailwater for well number 4, which is over here. And currently, the ditch directs the water to the Longhorn piece, and that's how it will be until the Pattersons develop their piece. But when they do develop their piece, we need a place for us to direct our tailwater. And so the proposal is to direct it to Dry Creek. And so rather than it going tailwatering out into the Pattersons piece, we would pipe it and direct it north and bring it into Dry Creek. And so to his point, what he's wanting is us not to construct a pipe and have the water just pour out into his driveway right here. Right now, the step is constructing the pipe. We won't have water going through the pipe right now until the Longhorn piece develops. We would never start directing the water just going into not Dry Creek. Right now, what we're trying to figure out is, as far as funding, we do have the funding for the 50% that we have to pay for this portion along Chris's piece. But as far as finishing the project right now, we don't know yet. But technically, we have time to make that decision until we have the need to direct that water up that pipe. Does that make sense? So although we are wanting to construct the pipe right now while the road is open, that doesn't mean that the water's going to go there yet until that Longhorn piece develops. But when it does, we would direct it to Dry Creek.
And he has the guarantee that that will not happen into his property?
I guess it'd be buried underneath his driveway, right?
Well, we would be liable for that water. We would never direct it onto someone's private property.
Okay.
Yes.
But would you be liable for the downstream increased flows that's going to create?
That's a good question.
I'm sure you know all about that
Especially
now.
this year.
I know.
Great question for this year.
That's going to be a lot of flow, isn't it?
There's going to be a lot of questions of that very nature coming up, both for Highland and for hundreds of cities in Utah. It's hard to say whether that would directly increase the flow. You'd have to look at the 100-year storms and the high water marks and all of that for the engineering potentially. If the city does something that alters the natural drainage, there's some chance, but cities are not generally liable for what the courts call acts of God and unnatural floods. So there's some tension there that the last time the whole bunch of court cases came out was in '83, and I'm feeling that we're going to see a whole bunch of more cases come out this year.
But this is controlled flow. This is a well that we turn on.
This is what we control, so we should be able
pump.
to manage it in a way that does not actually
this isn't
have
an act of God.
This is an act of God.
We turned on our pump, and
Yes.
we're pumping it over here.
So if we do something negligent, we don't construct it well to actually put it in a place where it can be handled, that would be the city's liability. That's water we've created, we're putting it somewhere,
So you're looking.
we own that.
You're looking downstream and making
Yes.
sure we're not getting
But
ourselves
that's going to be
in
the whole,
trouble.
I think, process of figuring out, okay, how do we actually make it not just flow across Chris's other property, home, and actually get where it needs to go and make sure it's managed properly, and maybe there would be some additional retention or detention basins proposed. I'm not sure how that's, we'll have to engineer it.
Can you,
And, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you show where it would need to go? So we see to the end of Chris's property, where is the actual outlet into Dry Creek?
This is
There's Dry Creek.
Dry Creek. Right? This is right, Chris, right? Okay.
So we would need to go all the way to that point.
So we would need to bring it from this point to this point, which
And that's the part under question. We don't have the right-of-way or the funds
just
to do
the
it?
funding, yeah.
We do have the
That's the
right-of-way.
primary.
Okay.
Well, right of way, that's location. We're currently working with Lehigh Irrigation on where they want the pipe to actually be set. So that's also to be determined. They actually want it in our right of way. So like they don't want to have any additional easements.
That's what I was getting at, is we don't have to then come up with an easement that last, was that 300 feet or?
We should not,
I can't
no.
tell. Okay.
And so this won't cause a problem for us as far as, this is residents' choice, if they're building fire pits and entries into the Dry Creek area in low sections of their property, which is on the west side, because I've seen several of those. They've kind of turned it into their little pond area with buildings and things like that down there. So that's just going to be,
That shouldn't impact the decision of the, piping of the ditch, no.
okay.
I do have a question. Two now. On the trail, on the piping going into Dry Creek, is Dry Creek itself maintained or deep enough or going to be maintained well enough to, take the water in and not be overflowing everywhere and all that kind of stuff? So that's the question on Dry Creek.
So that was to Jerry's question was, are we just going to dump this in a place that just can't handle the water? And
Are we gonna
as Kelly
maintain it?
pointed out, before we finish that piping, before we actually turn water onto there, we're going to do some engineering, finish that pipe, figure out where it needs to go and how we're going to maintain that Dry Creek channel to appropriately contain it and channel it. And that won't happen until Patterson's developed Longhorn, but I'm sure the city's going to be looking at that in the meantime because we know it's coming. We'll figure it out.
I also want to clarify, as far as our use of this ditch, when we say we pump to waste, with our well number 4, we do that annually. It's not something that we're going to be dumping water in every single week. So just,
The ditch, it would be prepared for the water, whatever we do with it.
Right.
That's the thing. The other question I had to do with the 112 north, going from 56 or whatever it is to 66. There are 2 houses. It's saying it's not going to impact houses, but there are actually 2 houses at least that I can see who the whole side of their house is along there. So their yard and all that they do is along there.
sorry, you're talking about these 2
Yeah,
homes?
right,
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't see why widening. I think it's not going to look. It's going to look just as ridiculous if we go from that to wider at the end. But I also feel like it's going to invite more, because it's a wider entry, more cars into that little neighborhood. That just goes into a couple of cul-de-sacs and then along neighborhoods. So I don't know what the need. I was in on at least 2 master plans way back when, and they change all the time, which is sad. But that was there before the newest master plans have been there, and they were okayed at 50, whatever it was. So I don't understand what the purpose of widening it would even be. That's my question, I guess.
Okay. Well, as far as purpose, and here, I want to address the impact portion first, simply just because the widening that we're reviewing or discussing is specifically on the applicant's piece. We're not doing any improvements or anything on the other side of the road. And so that's what I mean by we're talking specifically about vacant property that doesn't have any existing homes, because we're not talking about removing any sidewalk or taking anyone's side yards or anything like that. As far as this 66-foot wide flared intersection. Like I said, it's part of the current transportation master plan. Whether that changes in the future or not, that's not something that we can determine yet. I know we are working on a comprehensive general plan update in the near future, and so that I'm sure this will be a section that we will look at and do extensive study on. But as of right now, all we can do is plan for what is on our existing plan and has been looked at, because whether it ends up connecting or not, we do not have the answer today, and we're not going to. So that's where planning comes in, is we plan for what we can, and then when decisions are made, then we deal with them when they come. Hope that answers your question.
So I've got 3 questions, and forgive me if I'm long-winded or confusing. Just ask me back questions. The first one is about the sewer easement. So on Lot 7, if I recall, if they can't figure that out and it has to stay there, is that lot still viable? Can you still sell it and build something on there, or are they going to be back asking for a adjustment or some type of easement to build on that? And I'm happy to hear from Chris.
I was like, whoever you want. Okay.
So from a practical point of view, the way that the sewer was designed and where the city chose to put 6,000 West, hence this bizarre manhole poking out of the road, when you actually widen 6,000 West to the 66 feet, the sewer line will be exposed 18 inches above the ground. So it's not practical. Sure. So if, for whatever reason, and it'll probably be a 0.0 probability % that we couldn't come to an agreement, because I think we already have agreement with the TSSD folks. We just need to sign a document. We would probably have to just reroute the sewer line along the back of the properties parallel with 6,000 West. But that really negates it helps us because then we could develop the property, but it doesn't really help TSSD have access to it from a practical point of view, because they would prefer, currently they have 50-year lifespans for sewer lines, and this was built 47 years ago. And it's running very fast, and the line is a little sketchy. Okay. And so they would prefer to have access on a tar road.
So just to clarify my question, it sounds like you may have agreement before you hit City Council or before you go for final approval. You're expecting that?
Yeah, I'm meeting with them on next Monday or Tuesday, and then we go to they have a separate approval board, probably the end of May. Okay. So by the time we come back for final plat approval,
it'll be approved or
it'll either just disappear and you'll never hear from us again because it's not feasible, sure, or we'll come back and say we've got everything sorted.
Okay, perfect. And the follow-on question of that was, and hopefully you know the answer to this, typically easements are not single. There's multiples in there. That is the only easement in that. So if you get the sewer district to sign off, there's no other right-of-ways, easements of any other kind, and it will truly go away?
Correct. So we'll actually pay to abandon the line, remove the manholes, fill it with sand where appropriate. Okay. But we will have other easements that are just part of normal development.
Oh, I understand. I would just mean that specific one. That's what I was trying to get. There's not some other utility embedded in that same area?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The other question I had was on the 66-foot flare. And I kind of look at things a little bit different maybe. I've driven down that road several times and trying to understand it, but are there any maintenance concerns with that road not going to the 66? Was there any kind of plans or requirements that would be a problem for the city if we don't meet our current traffic plan?
Regarding like typical road maintenance or snow plowing or anything, probably not. It wouldn't impact it.
No, nothing to do with drainage, anything
Like needing
that?
additional right-of-way for a utility, no.
Okay.
Just because even in our typical 56 feet of right-of-way, we have standards for where utility lines are located. But the 66 feet of right-of-way is purely because, yeah, again, one, it's on our master transportation plan. And then the other is, if you look back at this cross-section, so the purpose of a 66 feet of right-of-way is to provide for a right turn lane and shoulder. And so what this flared intersection basically purpose is, when you have people that are turning left and waiting to turn left, that you don't have to have a line up there, and people that want to turn right can have the space to turn right, and you don't have a backup.
Okay, and understand all of that. I was merely looking for any kind of serviceability or requirement that we needed to line up or meet with something else. I think that's been answered. The next piece was, has anyone in our public works or public safety addressed for a fire truck to turn in there, or any kind of public service vehicles? Any big difference between that extra 10 feet is going to provide us?
No, not for the fire department or anything. Like their minimums are like 20 feet of asphalt. But obviously, Public Works and our engineering departments have seen this, and as far as staff recommendations go for all those departments, it's all going to be the same as far as following the development code and master plans as the development code requires.
Okay, nothing stands out. That's
No.
really what I was looking for. And then the last question was, you'd mentioned a property swap, and I didn't quite, could you run over that one more time? I didn't quite catch that all.
Yes. So we haven't had the chance to, because this portion or requirement has been in question as we've been going through the development process, so we haven't been able to determine what the actual square footages are, and if that swap's going to be even or not. It's yet to be determined. But this is that city-owned right-of-way jog that I was pointing out. Let me go back to the preliminary plat. You can see that this jogs out right here. Issue being, obviously, so sidewalk is going to line up along the backs of these property lines. And then the sidewalk being straight, we're going to have this city right-of-way jog that is outside of the sidewalk and is actually going to go into where the planned retaining wall is. And so ideally, we would have the property lines be adjusted to be along the back of walks to be consistent with our typical property lines and where setbacks are measured. And then, so the idea was to make it more fair, or coming up with more of a compromise here. We'll give you this square footage for the right-of-way. You provide us the square footage for the 66-foot flared intersection.
That looked like what it was. It just wasn't clear. So we're swapping the one on the top left corner.
This one for
what
this
we were
one,
proposing.
correct.
Perfect. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
So just on the road width, I kind of, the general plan is a guideline basically, isn't it?
The exception for that actually relates to roads. Public roads are required to comply with your master plans.
So what happens to us if we don't?
Someone could challenge it. Likely not, because everyone seems to be in favor of the exception, but that would be the immediate effect. Longer term, someone could claim, well, have you really required this as part of the master plan? Say there was some other development. Not likely. It seems like everything else along here has already been done. So except for that gap, which is, that's not going to be developed. That would be something else the council would have to decide. So there's no real precedent set. It's just a question of whether to grant an exception or not.
Yeah, because I kind of feel that ship sailed. When we allowed the two subdivisions to go to 55, we issued a permit. So you have the building department, planning department. Everybody's kind of ignored the 66 until right now when we're flaring it. And I just think of when I drive to Costco and you got all the different roads. And I think it's more cohesive if you have the 66 on the east side, and then it stays at 55 and connects over here. And then if they do connect that, because I went and drove it today, and if they do connect that one strip, I just don't see that was a critical thing on anybody's list when we developed 2 other properties and put the 55. We issued permits that the buildings apparently would have to be torn down to accommodate us if we wanted to spend money to go tear up all this road we already put in just to get the 66. I think the reason that's on there is we're just hyper-focused on this one thing in the plan. But I think enough precedence has been set down the flow that, to me, I would just connect the road at the 55, and if you have a hard time turning right, don't go that way. Or cut through his neighborhood. If I see a car up there, I'm going to cut through and then turn right on the other thing. So I just think it's hodgepodging everything. I think we've already gone to the 55. We set enough precedence on 2 subdivisions, permits. We just finish it. And as far as the wedge little piece that we're trading, he can give you something else with the trail system or the water line maybe that you guys got to put in for your pump. I don't know. This seems like there's something else. I don't think the city's going to want that jog either. So but that's just my feeling on it. I am tending to not put this. I don't even know if that's a proper profile for a turn lane. And I just think we're hanging on to something that I don't think is ever going to happen. And so that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Do you mind if I make a comment real quick? I just want to clarify, because I've heard it been brought up a couple times, but just regarding those 2 subdivisions being approved, both of those were approved and recorded in the early 90s. Like the meetings were like 93 to 95. And this master transportation plan was adopted in 2008. So I do want to clarify, I don't know what the plan was before 2008, and if they were like, no, we don't want to do 66, I don't know, but I do know that our current plan was adopted after those 2 subdivisions were approved.
My guess is when they adopted the plan, nobody went out and drove everything. They just got a map, started lining stuff up, and then actually go out there and see what's going to be impacted. But the permits, so is there already a right-of-way recorded on all those properties since it was recorded so much earlier? Do you have a 66-foot right-of-way to actually
further east? Yes, east of that connection that we've been discussing or people have had concerns about. It's 66 feet of right-of-way.
The 2 neighborhoods that you just talked
about.
No,
that one is recorded as 56. Yes,
so we would have to go
56.
Condemn property, and see, I just don't see that happening.
I can't say that it would happen.
Yeah,
I don't know.
See Highland. Well, as somebody that's trying to advise council, I just don't see that happening. I see us spending money on a lot of other things that need help, like our trails, our road conditions. I don't see us condemning a section to get us connected into an already busy area that's going to be overloaded once the Patterson thing goes on that 6,000. That's going to already be an overloaded road. I don't think I wouldn't direct more traffic to that point is what I'm saying. And I just think it's going to look 66, 55, 66, nothing, or whatever that thing is. What is that? Just dead space? Where the road doesn't connect? There's a section that's not connected, right?
Yeah, it's a section of right-of-way.
Yeah, and it's just whatever, so. And then I liked your response on the water that Chris talked, because I think the plan will be to bury it, and it'll go underneath, obviously, and then if we do have issues downstream, just shut it off, right? Just if it's raining, don't turn it on. If there's snow melt, don't turn it on. So I think that concern is well thought. So those are my comment would be to not do item number 5, and I'm fine with item 6 because I think it'll be taken care of properly.
I just wanted to follow up on your comment. I don't see the issue with that flare. I think it is added safety. I don't see how it detracts from the neighborhood. I don't see how it increases the speed of the road. It's a turning lane to go right. And I'm still trying to understand how we can approve something that goes against what we've already approved. So the legal aspects of us giving this exception, been a while since I was on the Board of Adjustments. I don't know that we have the right to do that, or do we? Without changing it. That's a question for you, Rob.
You're doing it on the first half of the property. To do what you just said, we're going to have to go 66 all along his property.
So to the question, and this was one of the questions Commissioner Abbott raised earlier, under state law, it says general plans are generally advisory, they're guidelines. There is a limited exception in state law where it says after a legislative body has adopted a general plan, no street, park, or other public way, ground, blah, 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 whether publicly or privately owned, may be constructed or authorized until and unless it conforms to the current general plan. And Highland City's code reflects that in the development code and says that for all subdivisions, they must conform to the city's master transportation plan. So it's both a state law and a city code requirement for roads to conform to general plan requirements. That does raise the point, as Commissioner Abbott pointed out, that to hold firm to that would actually be to require 66 feet of right-of-way, the entire width up until the boundary of the property. This is more of an attempt to compromise competing interests. I guess that could be an alternative request, is to say do 66 feet all the way across. Staff doesn't see the need for that with the way the previous subdivisions were approved prior to the general plan, but that's certainly within the Commission's ability to recommend.
So can you still leave the 66-foot easement there, but just require the 55-foot road? And then the city still has the opportunity, if they decide to condemn everybody else, put in the road, spend millions of dollars for this collector road, they still have the opportunity to do it. It just doesn't have to happen right now.
Yes, so I think...
But that still conforms, because we...
To require 66 feet to be dedicated, but only a certain width to be actually constructed, yes, that could be an alternative.
Because you're going to have to do it on the first half anyways. You can't flare that road and then just do a 55-foot easement on the first half of the property. You're going to have to, otherwise we have to go back, spend money, condemn. So, I mean, you could just put the 66 in, but just put a 55-foot road in there. So it's just...
That is also an option.
I also think when you're turning right on that road, it's safer not to be next to a car that's trying to go left, trying to look around him and then bolting over. I don't think having a turn lane is necessarily safer. I think, hey, wait your turn, get up, you could look both ways freely and then turn right.
It is not a congested area either, so it's not like we have a lot of cars waiting to turn left or right at that area. It's a neighborhood. But also we're talking about now a road that's already in, and it's already 56, and it's not a new road. Also, we're talking about the west side being 50 whatever, and that's okay. So I don't know, I think we're putting way too much into making this little jag on that road.
With the west, I do want to clarify with Patterson's not having to do 66. Reason being is because that is not included in the transportation master plan. The 66-foot requirement is specifically for 6,000 west to 4,800 west. There was no exception given to the Pattersons to not have to do 66. It's because it is a local street and is not designated as a collector with our general plan.
I also remember the traffic study when Patterson brought different renditions of their property in, and that intersection fails every time already, trying to make all the traffic studies happening. So putting a bigger road connecting into that, I don't think is going to help that traffic count either. But I think we meet the law by
What do you mean,
putting the
Jerry?
easement.
What do you mean it fails?
There's so much traffic that the Patterson property can generate in that intersection, especially with the poles and everything. There were just a lot of issues right there, which is why UDOT was saying we're not going to give you another connection onto SR 92 off of their property. We're not going to let you go, that this is it kind of a thing. There's just I just know that intersection, once Patterson goes in, is going to be a troubled area. But if we're able to keep the law by putting in the easement there, but just putting the road in at what I believe is going to be what's going to be there forever. And then if the plan does change, we got to go tear up everybody's stuff anyways. That's just one more section. I just don't see it happening.
And is that something that Highland City has to pay for and compensate?
When you condemn property,
Yes. So if,
Yeah,
most
if you
of all,
approved
we
it as
want to.
56 and then we needed 66,
Right.
yes, we would have to go through that process. Process.
One, we want to make convenience and keep the feel in the neighborhood, but two, we also want to keep the city from paying what we have to pay to do that,
In the
since we
future.
make so little in our city, because we are a bedroom community. So actually, my question is east of this section. Doesn't the road stop and then jog? And then there's like a little, is there any way to get that?
I think you'd have.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's no straight flow right there.
No.
And isn't there a spot where it kind of blocks off all the way? They have a barrier? Okay. So are we requiring that to be moved as well at this time, or do we just keep that as is?
This is kind of, well, what I was trying to explain at the beginning, just that this connection and any potential widening here is not a part of this application, and none of the decisions that y'all make tonight are going to impact that. And so obviously, like, y'all can discuss it and talk about it, but that's not the action that y'all are making tonight, and that is something that would be reviewed by the council at a future date.
So if we were preparing for the widening for the entry to 12200, and we did that the full extent of the property, is Chris compensated for that being?
No, because it's part of a development, it's considered an exaction, which
Okay.
there's a lot of rules about how much the city can exact from a developer in exchange for approval, where if the city goes too far, the city does owe compensation for that. So typically, these type of exactions are not where it's half of a road that's directly serving a development. It's not too controversial.
And the general plan shows that road just going straight, right? It doesn't show that little. It shows a straight blue line.
It does show the little blip. Obviously, it's really hard to see here, but it shows it.
Shows the lip.
Yes.
So I guess back to my original question, if we approve it as we have it presented here with that 66 on the one end narrows down, or are we putting the city in any circumstance that we should be concerned about, or do we need to push for the full 66 along it if we want to do that?
The risk to the city is that someone could challenge the approval, say you recommended that, the council approved it as presented. Someone could come back to the city and say you should have required more. Most likely that would not probably be the developer. It would be someone else coming in to say you should have required more from the developer. I don't know if there's anyone who'd be interested in doing that. That is a possibility, in which case
A very low one, right?
We'd go through our land use appeal process. It's not a liability type thing. It's a, hey, you have a standard, you didn't follow your code, you have to fix your approval and do it again.
But if we have the easement, we've met the requirement.
Yes, so, and that's,
We can
to
tell
your,
that
to your
person-
point, if you could do the dedicate 66 right-of-way, construct to the 56 right-of-way standard, at least the city does have the full right-of-way dedication for a road, so it has claimed the right-of-way.
So if they decide to go condemn everything and spend all the millions of dollars to do it, they have that right away.
It would
or
connect
locked up.
through.
Yeah. Yeah. They wouldn't have to pay those people for the lot. It's an easement or right away that they have.
I guess I'm trying to understand that because it's come up a couple times. If I understood what you said correctly, Kelly, 6,000 is the only one that applies here. what Jerry's talking about is the 12 or 11,200 and widening it, that's not in the general plan as being that width. If they wanted to do that, they'd be going against the plan?
Oh, sorry. As far as what's applicable here, everything that is, this subdivision is fronting is applicable. I think I'm maybe misunderstanding your question. What they're all discussing is that 11,200
And in
road
that,
widening at the 66.
it's 66 all the way through if it was all underneath the same rule.
Correct. So this like kind of light blue line going from 6,000 to 4,800 west is all planned as that 66-foot.
I misunderstood. I thought it was just the 6,000 that this applied to, and we were just trying to blend it.
No, sorry. Yeah, 6,000's a different, it's a 3-lane major collector,
Yeah,
so
that's why.
different
Okay.
designation.
Maybe I'll just try to clarify that a bit. I think the concern is if the city is going to, because two subdivisions to the east, which were approved prior to the general plan, were built with 56-foot right-of-ways connecting from the edge of this property on the west out to where that gap is, where there is no road. So those are all 56-foot right-of-ways. And the question is the city ever going to do an expansion where it takes more property, builds this out to be a full, and that's a question that we don't know yet, what the city council may or may not decide in the future. So there is, and I think I see the point of saying, well, if the council's never going to do that, why require it on this development? Because it's been 56 feet to that gap. And staff is saying, well, staff's kind of bound by what our general plan says, so that's what we're going to recommend. And we try to come with an accommodation. If you'd like to do something different, you can certainly recommend it to the council. But whether to expand, to take, do that whole condemnation process, to actually build that out, that's not being decided tonight. It is, I guess, implicated by the decision, as I've explained.
Yeah, we're looking upstream to see what's happened. So basically on the one side of the gap, it's 66 already.
Yes.
On this side of the gap, so two separate areas, it's 55.
Yes.
And to reiterate, if we were to recommend that it be 66 with a 56 road staying the same, but with an easement, sidewalk, or whatever it is going to be, then the lots aren't infringed on that are being built right now in the future.
No, the city would not allow construction within those lots. Basically, the city would say your property boundary is at 66 feet, which will leave potentially a 10-foot gap on that north side, if that is the direction you go.
But that's the direction you were going anyways. Right, Kelly?
Except with the flare, that one lot would be.
The flare was going to come out to the easement, but you weren't going to drop the easement down to 55.
That was the accommodation that was being made.
Somebody builds in that area, and then we got to tear that down and condemn that area if we want to. See, to me, it just oozes we're never doing it. I mean, we're not making the approval. I think council should just know that. I mean, what is our plan? Are you really going to dump all that traffic right in that area? It's already 66 up there. It's 55 here. I don't know.
So if we approve it as has been presented to us, we're making an accommodation. The easement will be in that 66 flare. Everything else will be out wherever it's supposed to be. We're not going to leave the city with a 10-foot strip a half a mile long that we need to maintain or the neighbors need to maintain, and we have the problem with encroachment, which we have all throughout the city. I'm not interested in giving the city a problem. I think that what we've got here is reasonable, but it is an accommodation, and to Jerry's point, it doesn't follow the letter of law, and I love the letter of the law, but I think it's a reasonable exception. So.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. do we feel like we're in a position to make a decision? Would anyone like to make a motion on the recommendations that city has? We are always welcome to make our own recommendations and add them to them, or remove one of the numbers and add one ourselves that we feel would solve the problem better.
So I'd like to make a motion that the Planning Commission accept the findings and recommendation of approval of the preliminary plat for the Williams View subdivision, subject to the stipulations recommended by the staff. I don't have any changes.
Can you put those stipulations up there?
Do we have a second? Or would someone else like to make a recommendation with different stipulations added?
We got to finish this one. If no one seconds, then drop it.
Well, I could make a motion, but my stipulation, I think, would be like dropping number 5. My only problem with it is the 5666 thing. The rest of all that is fine. Can
Do
I
you
make a
ha-
motion as such?
With the removal of number 5?
Just the removal of, number 5. that
Would you
said-
put the stipulations up one more time?
Yeah, I'm like, the way you would do it is basically read the motion and then just say, like, recommend what the stipulations recommended by staff, except for number 5, and then we can.
I could do that. I could stick your motion back up.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation instead?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that the Planning Commission accept the findings and recommend approval of the preliminary plat for the Williams View subdivision, subject to the stipulations recommended by staff, except when it pertains to number 5, I would recommend that we keep it 56 or 55, just the way it is now.
56, yeah.
56.
I'll second that.
Okay, then let's take a vote. Jerry?
Yes.
Chris?
Oh.
Can't. Sorry. Audrey? Yes. Trent?
No.
And Deborah?
Yes.
Okay, 3 yeses, 1 no. All right. That was not fun.
Out right there.
All right.
Beating everybody up on my first night,
Yeah. All right.
Just a second.
Sorry, I have to double check whether you need not just a majority of voting, but a majority of people of the commission to pass a motion.
Thank you.
Does Chris count non?
He can't. He can't
No,
vote.
but I'm-
As in, y'all have a full quorum, but in order for something to pass, he's saying if you need a majority of the 7 in order for a motion to pass. Does that make sense? So because y'all only had 3 approve, he's checking to see if it's just majority of the quorum or majority of the commission.
It doesn't say. Okay. Some cities say actually it has to be a majority of all members regardless, so it is for council, so you're fine. I just had to double check that so we could revisit it if need be.
All right. Zoning approval, item number 5 for Bliss Beauty Lounge LLC, land use, and we'll turn that time over to Kelly to present that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. So as far as this application, and our staff recommendation is for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the proposed use in the residential professional zone. Just a little bit of background. Essentially, we had a commercial business license application come through city staff for approval. And this application is in the residential professional zone. if y'all are familiar with the building just west of Quick Quack, where it's the dentist office and the Anodyne. But so they are wanting to add an additional tenant who is offering, well, the plan is to offer like esthetician services, but on top of that also providing kind of like blowout and hairstylist services and selling makeup. And so as staff, as reviewing this application, in the residential professional zone, this is like a summary of what the permitted uses are. And so as far as, well, the residential professional zone allows for community uses, financial institutions, Medicare care facilities, professional offices, including but not limited to the following, and then they have this whole list. One that was most applicable is doctor, dentist, psychologist, psychiatrist, or nurse. And then they allow single-family residences, so if someone wants to build a house in a residential professional zone, they can with R140 requirements. And then number 6 says other types of stores or services which the Planning Commission and City Council determined to be compatible with the intent of the zone. And then number 9 goes into whenever a use has not specifically been identified in the foregoing classification, it shall be the duty of the City Planning Commission to recommend and the City Council to determine if said use is consistent with the intended use of the RP zone, is compatible with the other listed uses, and is compatible with the uses of adjacent properties. And so that's kind of what y'all are looking at today. Like I said, we received that commercial application. The wording where in the application you kind of have to describe what services you're providing, and this is the wording that they provided. In reviewing it, we determined that it was not a listed or specified permitted use in the RP zone, and so in communication with the applicant, they did further describe it, calling it a medical care facility, and saying that the manager is a master esthetician, and then a nurse will be on staff as well, and that the products and treatments are medical procedures and medical grade products which require a medical license to secure and administer. And again, meeting with the applicant, it was still part of the request to include, to offer the hairstyling services and makeup, which aren't necessarily tied to an esthetician practice. And so because of that portion of the business, we did still feel it was necessary to go before the Planning Commission and the Council for approval. These were our findings in reviewing this application in comparison to the intent of the zone, which in the staff report I included that section of the RP zone that goes through the intent. And as staff, we believe it's compatible with the purpose and intent of the zone, as in it's not a retail use, which would not be permitted in this zone, and that the use also does not create any prohibited nuisances, and that in the RP zone there's a specific section called nuisances, and it calls out specific nuisances that they don't want to be in the zone, and this does not violate any of those. And so, like I said, our staff recommendation is to recommend approval. This does not require a public hearing, but the applicant, Garen Larson, is also present if you have any questions for him specifically.
Thank you, Kelly, for presenting that. Does the applicant want to say anything first to the commission? Who is the applicant? So no? Okay. All right. Commissioners, opening it up for discussion. Is there anything you want to discuss?
No.
I heard Quick Quack, but where was the location that you?
Sorry, it's just west of Quick Quack. Yeah, it's a building that's already constructed. It's a dentist office. It's that white looking building. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you.
And there's adequate parking and everything in that location, so.
No new square footage or anything.
If there's no further discussion, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval.
Oh.
No.
That's something that the chair would be allowed to allow if you would like. Otherwise, there is no.
Commissioners, are you?
It's not a requirement.
All right. Go ahead. Just go ahead and state your name and address again. 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Doug Courtney. I live at 10891 North, 5750 West. And if the commission is going to approve this, I would recommend adding an additional finding that it's compatible with the use of adjacent properties, since that's a finding that's required to be made and doesn't seem to be covered by the recommended findings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's that, Kelly?
So just as far as this letter C, just saying that it's compatible with the uses of adjacent properties, because in the proposed motion, it's accepting the findings. So he's proposing to add that finding to y'all's motion. So when you start making the motion, I can bring it back to this slide and you can add that if y'all like.
That sounds great. I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed use in the residential professional zone, adding it is compatible with the uses of adjacent properties.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Jerry?
Yes.
Chris?
Definitely yes.
Audrey, yes. Trent?
Yes.
And Deborah? Thank you. That motion has passed. We're on to the next one, 7, I think. Planned development major amendment, Apple Creek. And Kelly, we'll go ahead and turn that over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. All right. This is a kind of complicated staff recommendation, and like always, I'll go through each of these individually as I go throughout the presentation. As far as a staff recommendation, so this is a major amendment to a planned development, so we treat it like a development code amendment where it is legislative. The commission has full discretion to either recommend approval or denial, just whatever y'all feel is best. And so we do not have a recommendation for either approving or denying this application. We do have, if the Planning Commission decides to approve, we do have recommended stipulations with an approval. And that's what these are. They won't make sense if I go through them right now. I will go through them in a moment. So as far as the background, so 10700 is just across the street. It's that one building that you see being constructed there, and then you have the brownstones, or the back portion of it, which are the buildings that have the flat roofs over by the bank. But that property has a PD, or a planned development, that's associated with it. A planned development is essentially a zone that we, with the applicant, write and adopt, where it's a zone unique to that property. It's not applicable to anywhere else in Highland. In that PD, it did allow for a 0 lot line setback on one side of each of these lots, and then you have a 10-foot setback on the other side. And so you have walls going right along this 0 lot line, if that's where they want to construct it, and then a 10-foot side yard, and then next building. That's what these villas and twin houses are. In the PD, there's no mention or allowance of projections over the property line. I also want to know, in the PD, there are architectural examples as far as their architectural requirements, and 3 out of the 5 of those didn't have any sort of roof overhanging or making it seem like there would be a roof overhanging a property line. And so it was just, as far as approving it as 0 lot line, it was the understanding that it would be 0 lot line. When it came to submitting for a building permit and the plans for Lot 2, which is the one that's constructed right now or under construction, the building was proposed on the 0 lot line and did not show any roof overhang on the plans. When our building official reviewed it, understanding that there was no roof overhang, he still added comments reiterating the fact that there can't be a roof eave or a soffit over the property line. However, once the building started being constructed, it was then constructed with a 12-inch roof overhanging the property line. As a result, when one of our inspectors went out, he failed that inspection. And then when that came up, the developer, the home builders, and staff met to discuss this issue. And how it happened, how to solve it, how to come up with a solution. In discussing the solutions that came up, staff determined that the requests or the changes that were being discussed would require a major amendment. Essentially, in the code for planned developments, there are minor amendments and major amendments. Minor amendments are, it's specific what can be considered a minor amendment, and when it is minor, staff can actually approve them. They don't have to go to Planning Commission or the council. But then if it's this other specific criteria, one of them being if it doesn't meet development code requirements, it would require a major amendment. And that's what we determined this request being, is that it didn't meet development code, therefore it would require a major amendment, and that's why we're here. This is their requested amendment. The verbiage is obviously in the staff report as well. So the proposal is to allow for roof overhangs, exhaust vent terminations, and utility meters and other projections on the zero lot line side of the villas may extend into the adjacent lot, including any setback areas on such adjacent lot, by up to 3 feet. A recorded declaration shall contain, so like their CC&Rs, shall contain a prohibition on any structures or ignition devices being placed within 5 feet of the villa wall on the abutting zero lot line of any lot, which prohibition shall not be amended without the written consent of Highland City. So kind of breaking that up, they would record this in their CC&Rs. It would be associated with the property, and the CC&Rs could not change without our city approval. Typically with CC&Rs, we don't handle them, we don't deal with them because they're private agreements, but this stipulates that they couldn't change them without our approval. And then moving on, Highland City has determined that the permitted projection of roof overhangs, exhaust vent terminations, utility meters, and other permitted projections, when combined with the prohibition in the previous sentence, complies with the International Residential Code's distance requirements for fire separation distance for villa projections. So that's the verbiage that they've proposed. Now I'm kind of going to go through it a little bit and go through what our recommendations are.
Just to add something where they say Highland City has determined that the permitted so on, that's them saying that. We're not saying that.
So, yes. So in our recommendation.
And neither have we told them that.
So what are we presenting? Are you presenting what you want, Kelly?
So initially I'm going to present their request, and then I'm going to go through our staff review of their request. And if the Planning Commission thinks that it should be approved or to recommend approval, this is what we suggest you stipulate with that approval.
Can I ask one question first?
Yes.
To how many units does this apply already that are built?
Well, this is the only one that has been built. However, this would deal with all of the, all of the lots that have lot lines. So it would be 32, right? Because brownstones are 10, so it's 32 lots.
This would just apply to this project, not citywide, or?
Correct. It would just be applicable to the PD. So going through, and again, all these were discussed in the staff report, but these are the primary development code sections that we as staff determined their request did not comply with and therefore required a major amendment. PDs allow you to make exceptions to development code with your legislative approval, and so that's where you would be allowed to make that decision if you'd like. And so regarding yard space for one building only, essentially these are saying you can only have one building on one lot. No setbacks can be measured from someone else's yard. It can't be measured from some other parcel or off of a different property line. It's all applicable to this lot. So that's development code requirements and why we deemed, hey, this requires a major amendment because this does not comply with these sections. As far as International Residential Code, this is obviously our building officials' main issue. International Residential Code is adopted by our city. We follow it. Obviously, it's an international code. So the IRC states that for non-sprinkled buildings, fire resistance rated projections from walls must have a fire separation distance between 2 to 5 feet, and projections with less than 2 feet of fire separation distance are not allowed. And that fire separation distance is defined as the distance measuring from the building face to one of the following. And to the closest interior lot line is what we focused on as far as this does not meet International Residential Code, is because you cannot have a projection closer than 2 feet from the closest interior lot line, and you have a projection that's going over the lot line, and so this does not meet this. With their proposal, they are wanting to use number 3, which would be the distance measured from the building face to one of the following being to an imaginary line between 2 buildings on the lot. And so imaginary line is part of this proposal where in the CC&Rs we're going to create this 5-foot prohibition of ignition sources and any structures, and that's our imaginary line by International Residential Code. As far as our concerns, maybe I'm going to go on this after. Okay, I'm going to go through these stipulations first, and then I'll address our staff concerns. If the Planning Commission decides to recommend approval, here are the stipulations we recommend. This is just that the 5-foot prohibition of structures or ignition devices on the side yards adjacent to the 0 lot line be recorded by easement in addition to the stipulation being outlined in the CC&Rs. So not just recording in CC&Rs, but having an actual easement recorded. We also included that they shall be approved by the city, and then the applicant may decide to either have the easements recorded through a plat amendment, which would be doing them for all lots at once, or have individual easements be recorded to each individual lot, and they could decide which process to go with. Another stipulation, if you remember in their proposed amendment, they say roof overhangs, exhaust ventilations, I don't even remember that wording, just a second. And then the utility meters and other projections. And so we as staff are proposing, hey, let's remove other projections and only allow these things that were specifically called out and permitted to encroach. And then number 3, the encroachment allowance of up to 3 feet be reduced to 2 feet. This, like I said, the current roof overhang is 12 inches over the property line. And talking with our building official, that utility meter box that is like installed on that side of the wall, he was like the most it would extend out is maybe 16 to 18 inches from the wall. And so just that out of these 3 things we have listed, there's no reason for them to need 3 feet to encroach, and so the proposal is to limit it to 2 feet and no more. Number 4, that the encroachment allowance shall also be recorded as an easement on each property, and so we're saying 2 separate easements, one saying prohibition of these ignition sources and sheds, and then another easement saying these people next to you are allowed to encroach for these 2 feet for these uses. So it's just recording 2 different requirements on the property to make sure that it's understood what these requirements are. And then that last sentence that Jay called out about Highland City saying this, we're proposing different verbiage for that to say compliance with the maximum projection distance and the recordation and enforcement of the prohibition on structure and ignition sources as described in the previous sentences shall be required to satisfy fire separation distance requirements under the IRC. So just to kind of give you a visual of what this would look like, so as an example, the one that's being constructed is on lot 2. And so these are these examples of the 2 different easements, one being that 2-foot encroachment allowance easement, and then the other one being 5-foot projection of structures, ignition sources easement. To give you an understanding of what ignition sources would mean, that would be barbecues, grills, fire pits, anything that creates fire or smoke that could potentially set that roof overhang on fire. That's the required fire separation distance for IRC, is to prevent that or protect from that.
So that easement is for Lot 3?
Correct.
And then the orange easement is for Lot 2?
Correct.
Got it.
in favor of Lot 2.
The total distance of the two easements.
So it's just 5. So the 2 is overlapping the 5,
Okay.
if that makes sense. And so going back to as far as staff's concerns with these easements and the recording of these easements, one is the residents' expectations. It's not typical for a resident to expect to have to look at code or their title or easements or recorded easements to know what kind of activities they can do in their side yard, especially when it comes to a fire pit or just pushing your barbecue onto one side of your yard. Also, the potential impact of residents not following the requirements of the easement, even if they understand it and know it, if they don't follow it, and if there was a fire, no, we technically wouldn't be liable for it, but it's just the idea of trying to protect these future residents in their homes.
The wall and the overhang are still 1 hour fire rated, right? They're protected? Yes. Okay.
And then the other issue was the difficulty of the city enforcing things of this nature. I mentioned in the staff report regarding our encroachment policy with encroachments that are in city property and how difficult that has been over the years. And I know we just adopted that, and right now we're in the process of enforcing it, and it's not easy. It hasn't been easy for staff. It's not easy for council members. And I just think of, as far as enforcing a 5-foot wide strip on when someone only has 10 feet of yard, it would be difficult. As far as it being required in CCNRs, technically it would be the HOA's responsibility to enforce it. Whether we can control that or not, I don't know. All HOAs are different, and their enforcement can be different. And so that's why we were requiring it to be in the PD and have it be recorded easements, so that we would have the right to enforce it if we needed to. But yeah, we just wanted to express our concern for
If a fire
that aspect.
were to happen, if the neighbor put his barbecue there and burned the house down, he's basically liable.
He would be liable.
He's violated those things. That's really the intent, I think, right?
At what point in time, the people who are buying these units, at what point in time is it disclosed that they don't have full control over their backyard?
Is there signage on each unit saying no?
As they're signing their closing documents and it's stacked this big and in there is,
Yeah,
oh,
it's
by
in
the
their
way.
HOA documents if they choose not to read it.
Yeah.
And are some of these rental units? So if someone's renting or subleasing,
You're good. This also does require a public hearing and has been noticed as such. And so, yeah, that's another thing that would have to be held before a decision is made.
okay. Thank you very much, Kelly. I'd like to open this up as a public hearing, and anyone would like to come up and speak, please state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes to share with us. And Kelly, if you could check online to see if anyone is there. Thank you. We'll close the public hearing and open it up for the commission to discuss concerns and ask any questions you'd like to know.
Can I first just clarify so my understanding is the issue is right now you cut the eave off and it's not very aesthetic. This will solve the issue in that they can put the easement or put their overhang on there and any meter that might be hanging on the side of the building. And the way you guys have edited their submittal, that still fixes what the issue is. Is that correct? Okay.
So question I've got, and maybe you can clarify for me. You talked about the overhang, but then like utility box or something hanging on the side of the house that was up to 16, 18 inches. How does one access that when the property line's over here? How do they get to that? That's the part I'm struggling with, and what is and this is maybe more of a question too, what is and what isn't allowed in that 5-foot easement? Meaning, do they have to allow the right of whatever to access the utilities?
The way we would have them present the easement to us to edit the language, but we'd probably have something about the 5 would be restricting of structures, ignition source, et cetera. The 2-foot would say the right to maintain an encroachment and some other language, so which would necessarily imply the right to use that to, get on there and access it. So that would be part of that 2-foot easement at the very least, or 3 feet as they propose.
I think also when you sign your utility bills or hook up your utilities, you're also signing that you're allowing the utility company to enter your property.
Yep. Utility companies just go on people's property.
Yeah, they're just going to go and read the meters.
You're allowing them on your property, but this is not on your property. That's the point I'm getting at.
I think it's the utility company in general. They'll look at their meter and look at that meter.
Anyways, that answers that. So what about fencing? Is this going to have any kind of stipulation on any kind of fencing or barriers that can be placed there?
I didn't even think of fencing. Well, the has fencing being there like it's a fenced private yard. I didn't think of the fact that.
Right. I mean, the PD does provide for these kind of private yards. This would not restrict that fencing. Fences aren't usually considered the type of structure that you're worried about for fire code purposes. It does present an access question, but I don't think it would limit the fence.
Okay.
Does it make any requirements on the material of the fence if it's a wood fence?
I can check on that.
It's still an open hearing, right?
I have a question about the ground, the materials on the ground. I'm picturing 5-foot alleys between two houses, and can often turn into, the dumping grounds for the area, and windblown whatever in there that's not taken care of because nobody goes in there. They're not using it. That kind of thing to me is real concerning, and I'm seeing that. I'm from Boston. I see, I know projects when I see them. But, that kind of stuff has a concern for me, too. Aesthetics, we have to drive by, this is our neighborhood, this is our home.
So
I think the HOA maintains that, right?
Yes, these
Common
may be
area.
private or HOA, I'm not quite sure, but the PD already established that these were a certain feet wide. They're fairly narrow lots, but I think they're 35 feet wide. So they're required to have 10 feet of a side yard. This doesn't change how the side yard necessarily looks, except for those, 3 stories up, there'll be a roof overhang, and then on the ground there will be some meter on one side of the house. Otherwise, that yard will still be the adjacent lot's yard.
So, Deborah, that's a really good comment, but this is already approved in terms of how close they are to each other, and we sort of have the uglies here, whether we like it or not.
I also do want to know, I didn't mention that the applicant is also present if you have questions for him or wanted to hear from him.
I had a question for staff. Why will you not give us counsel on this? Is there a reason why you're withholding that? Because we do value your input.
Well, you have the staff recommendations on if you wanted to allow this, how we would suggest doing it. Whether to allow it or not, that's not a safety or fire code issue. That's a what do you want for Highland issue, and it's hard for staff to make a recommendation on that point. If you want to allow this, we've given you our recommendations on how to craft the language to allow it in a way that we think is we're more comfortable with.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes more sense.
If I can just take a minute. My name is Todd Amberry. I'm actually a Highland resident and the developer here. Just a couple things to clarify, just kind of helping add some context to the PD. So the PD was approved as a 0 lot line, and as Kelly was explaining, what that does is that allows the homeowner to have a full side yard. So essentially, instead of having a traditional 5-foot side yard setback on either side, you push the houses all the way over to one side, you still have your 10-foot separation, and then that whole, there you go. So you can kind of see, so the whole side yard is a private yard for the one house. So the one house does not have for instance, Lot 2 does not have windows on that side. So that will be the private yard for Lot 3, just like it'll be the same for Lot 2 on Lot 1. And the idea is that you'll fence in the front and back, so there'll be a wing fence in the front. So from the street, it'll look like a traditional lot with 10-foot side yard. Again, this is all just on paper. When you drive by, it won't look any different because they'll be 10 feet apart. Be wing fence in the front, wing fence in the front, and then that's private side yard. That's basically their yard, side to side, all the way to that house. And then, as was mentioned, they'll have the opportunity to go in there and access for maintenance and anything else on that side. If they need to go paint their house or, clean their gutters or anything, they'll have access there, utility meter reading, those kinds
So
of
will
things.
those meters be forward? Like,
What
they
was
won't
that?
be behind the fence, will they?
The meters?
That's a valid.
Where is the meter on Lot 2? It's behind the fence. Oh, so the meter is behind the fence. That's what we're trying to figure out. That was one of the reasons why that came up. And we're fine with the way staff presented it. We weren't trying to get anything more than that. We were just trying to make sure, because it came up in the subsequent inspection, that, hey, we also have power meters, and the power company kind of tells you where to set them, and that happens to be on that side that also encroaches. And again, this is from a fire separation, the brownstones, which are the brick buildings on the other side, those are 5 feet apart, total 5 feet. So these will be 10 feet apart, and then those eaves will hang in 1 foot. So it'll be 8 feet of total separation eave to eave, and then all that is fire rated. So again, we meet fire code. There is just this, I'll call it a nuance, where it says, hey, the code says a measurement from a lot line, but because the PD was approved as 0 lot line, it's impossible because it was approved as 0 lot line. So it's impossible to meet that. And it was something that we should have addressed, we as the developer. The eaves and the overhangs were never discussed in the PD, and so that's why we're here today. And I think, again, I think it's pretty clear.
And this isn't a new concept.
We do this all over.
It's just fitting it in Highland. We're just not used to it because we're 1 acre lots.
Yeah, so we do 0 lot line product all over the country, and it's one of those things where most PDs, because this is a specific PD just for Apple Creek 10700, most of them don't account for that because city code accounts for it, but Highland doesn't have any code that accounts for it. So it automatically goes to that IBC IRC, and that's where that language came up, where it's got that little nuance in there that says you got to be off the property line. Now, there are other examples in the city of Highland that aren't 2 feet off the property line, but those are under different PDs. So because of all that, as Kelly was explaining, it needs to be a major amendment because it's not something staff can approve. It's got to be approved by, or recommended by Planning Commission and then approved by City Council ultimately.
So you're fine with the amendments they made to yours?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, that's totally fine. Any other questions or clarifications we can provide?
I was just going to ask, you mentioned you do this all over the place.
Uh-huh.
You've never interacted with a city that's had this similar question for you?
No. So like I said, the PD is kind of an overlay zone, and Kelly, correct me if I say something wrong. The PD is an overlay zone that would go on top of city code or city zoning ordinances. This PD was specific just for these 32 lots, the 10 brownstones, and the 2 office buildings out front. So it has specific sections, as Kelly just had pulled up, with fencing and architecture and all these other things. But what happened was when the PD was approved as a 0 lot line, meaning you could have your foundation right on 0, no one ever considered, including us, that, hey, we should include language in that PD that says, hey, you're going to have eaves. Because if not, and I could show you some examples down in Ridgeview that Weekly and Ivory have built, where the building inspector has required them to cut the eaves off. And I will just say it's hideous. It is not, I'm a resident of Highland, I live right down the street, I'm not ever moving, and it is not what I want for my city. And again, I'm the developer, I get it, but you can look at that. It is not what we want as a city. So with that being said, we approached it and said, okay, well, it sounds like we need to add some language to the PD to account for this overhang. And really, everything in the IRC, IBC code is related to fire separation. There's no safety issues here. This is an eave that sits up 30 feet in the air or a power meter that sits on the side of the house. There's no safety here. There's nothing. And again, the buildings, foundation to foundation, are 10 feet apart, which is 5 feet more than the buildings across the street. So we meet all of that. There's just this one line in there that says 2 feet off the property line, or measured from the property line, and that's what this PD amendment will essentially, I'll say override may be the right word. So yeah, we deal with this all the time. It's done here in Utah. Go out to Daybreak, Lehigh, Park City. It's done all the time. 0 lot line product. Eaves hang over, sometimes up to 2 feet. Our eaves are only 12 inches, but they hang over. It's an architectural element that we definitely do not want to get rid of. Those are really, really nice houses and very expensive, and it would look really, really bad if we cut those off. Now, that's a solution. I don't think it's a good one, but that's the alternative.
So, again, back to you said you've done this in many different places. I'm not concerned. I'm with you on everything you just said. It's not a safety issue, not a concern. It's enforcement.
Yeah.
It's how do people, you watch on YouTube or TikTok, neighbors filming each other and all of the nonsense that goes on. Your property is on my property.
Yeah.
Have you had to deal with any of that kind of nonsense?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And what means and methods can we put in place to avoid that, or it's not even in our realm of possibility?
So I think what the city's proposed is very reasonable and rational and really smart in terms of CC&Rs are one way, right? CC&Rs, HOA, enforcement, that's your first line of defense. So you have your HOA CC&Rs that stipulate and identify what it is, where it is. Everyone signs those, and we all know that no one reads the whole thing. But you can go right back to that, and if someone wants to complain, it's written, you signed it, you agreed to it, you knew it, okay, whether they read it or not. So that's the first line of defense. The second one is, as I mentioned, put an easement in. So not just have the CC&Rs identify it, but put an actual easement recorded on the lot that anyone can go to their title company. If they have a realtor, that's the job of a realtor, is to identify these types of things so that they know about it. Hey, you have an HOA. Hey, you have a district. You have something else. So that's the second line of defense, is that the city can do it. And really the last is the disclosures that the builder, Hillwood, who's here tonight, will identify at closing. So really they're identified 3 different times. There's an argument that it's not enough because a lot of people don't read those. But I'd say, a significant portion of transactions, new home purchases are represented by realtors, and that is those realtors' jobs. Whether that happens or not, that's another story. But, those are kind of your 3 lines of defense. So if you have all 3 of those, you have the CC&Rs with an HOA in place with a professional management company. We hire professional management companies that manage that. So they're there to enforce that. And if someone has an issue, their first line is, hey, I'm going to call my HOA management company or the board and say, hey, what's going on here? My neighbor's out here cleaning his gutters on my lot. I'll say, well, let me explain to you how this works. So that's your first line, then the city, and then the last is disclosures. And maybe not in that order, probably disclosures second. City should be last. The city should not be involved in this. The city should be kind of that last line of defense.
HOAs are usually pretty good at that, especially in those developments. But could you also, to what Trent was saying, is add in the CC&Rs that they allow meter readers to access property?
Yeah, no, it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, just add that to the same part of the...
just to clarify.
Yeah, just so they know.
That's a great suggestion.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for giving that explanation, but you piqued another question for me.
No problem.
And it's really about drainage.
Yeah.
So how do you manage the drainage of your roof? Are we pouring onto the neighbor, or are you setting it up properly as the builder, and then the homeowner has to maintain it?
So are you asking for roof drainage?
Yeah.
So the way these eaves are set up, I don't know, do you have any examples of the architecture? If so, I could show you. So basically, if you've got just a traditional A-frame roof, and that's probably not the right way to describe it, but just a traditional shed roof on this side that's coming off the lot 3. If you looked at that house, you've got that lot, you've got your eave that overhangs, and then you've got gutter all the way along there. Whoops.
You
and
take it back to your own property.
That's right.
Is what I'm asking.
That's right.
That's, I think.
Yeah, so there's gutters on that side that'll take it back down and then out and tie into the community storm drainage that'll go out.
Thank you.
Anything else?
The one I have is the one with
Can I make
roof
a
eave,
motion?
so I don't think it would.
Can I make a
help.
motion?
No problem.
Oh, she has to close the meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, they held the public hearing already.
No, we didn't close it. We just started.
So the public hearing is closed, but we were discussing as commissioners. Is there any other comment as commissioners or questions that want to be asked of the developer?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any discussion?
Nope.
Okay, if someone is ready to make a motion.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed amendment to the Apple Creek Plan development relating to building encroachments onto adjacent properties with the stipulation recommended by staff 1 through 5.
I second that motion.
Okay, so Jerry, that's a yes?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Audrey's a yes.
Yes.
Trent's a yes.
Yes.
And Deborah's a yes. Thank you. The text amendment, storm drainage, and Kelly's going to present that to us. Turn the time over to Kelly.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. All right, so this is a development code update, and it is a legislative item, so just like the other one, you have full discretion whether to recommend approval or denial. Our staff recommendation is to hold a public hearing and then recommend approval of the proposed amendment, and this is relating to storm drainage being directed toward a public right-of-way or city right-of-way. A little bit of background as to why this came up. We've had several developments come in recently that have required our parkway detail. Our general plan designates specific corridors like 10400 or Alpine Highway, Timpanogos Highway, those types of larger collectors that require our parkway detail, which is 29 feet wide and has a meandering sidewalk and is landscaped and looks really nice. But in our parkway detail, which is an adopted engineering standard, it does not specify the slopes at which the parkway detail should be graded. As a result, we've had difficulty in requiring developers to slope the drainage toward the roads. Engineering and Public Works prefer to have a 2% slope from parkway detail also requires a fence at the edge of the parkway detail. So you have the fence, parkway detail, and then curb and gutter. And so ideally, we would have a 2% slope going from the fence to curb and gutter, directing the drainage to the road. We've run into an issue where developer doesn't want to bring in the fill to allow for that 2% slope, and so they're we eventually came up with a solution, but essentially our drainage would be going into private lots onto the other side of the fence, and that's something that we want to avoid and not be liable for. But in order to enforce that, we do need to make it specific in code to ensure that all of that drainage that's on our property or city-maintained property is not going onto private lots. So the proposed amendment, a couple of the things were kind of cleanup things because we haven't touched this code for a little while. But we do specify that all drainage shall be contained within a given property or routed to an approved drainage facility. Another thing that we've been reviewing a lot is like the on-lot retention, where a lot of applications are coming in with grading where it's directing drainage from private lot to private lot to private lot, and that's not something that we want. Just because obviously then you end up having to do drainage easements or sumps at the back of each of these lots to maintain that drainage on the lot. And so ideally each lot's maintaining their own drainage, and any drainage that's on city property is being directed to more city property rather than private property. And so the primary addition relating to what I was just speaking about is that fencers or walls associated with the parkway detail or other fencing directly adjacent to public property along public rights-of-way shall be set such that drainage flows at a minimum of 2% slope from the base of the fence perpendicularly to the curb and gutter on the adjacent public right-of-way. The development code amendment is first step. We would then, our next step, if this is approved, would go to updating our parkway detail to reflect the same thing and show a cross section, so showing that specific slope. As far as staff review or the findings for this, it's consistent with the current practices and desires of the engineering and public works departments. We've had times where we've enforced it and it's worked up until now. And so that's where it kind of slipped by, is the developers were kind of like as in our park or public works superintendents were like, nope, 2% slope, we need drainage directed this way, and then they adjusted it and it was fine. But obviously legally we need something to back us up if we're going to require something like that, and so that's why we need to fix it now. It does conform with state law requirements regarding drainage, and that the amendment is, like I said, needed in order to enforce that 2% slope. And then this is a proposed motion to recommend approval. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. I also want to know, our city engineer is the one that wrote the amendment. I did not write it. It would probably look different if I wrote it. But our city engineer wrote it. Our public works staff and engineering departments all reviewed it and agreed with it. So I just wanted to make that clear. And it also requires a public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. We'd like to open it up for a public hearing. If anyone has comment online or in here, please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
There's no one
And
online.
it looks like there will be no public hearing comment, so we will close public hearing and open it up for commissioners to ask questions and discuss.
I have a question. So we don't want our water draining onto private property, but can they drain onto our property? So like if you have a street up here,
Everyone has to maintain their own drainage, and that's the other portion of that amendment.
Because we're going to be dealing with a lot of topography. So if you have a street up here, and it's a walkout basement lot where it slopes down, and then their back fence, then the parkway, and then the drainage is over there. Typically, when do they drain through the parkway and into the drainage? Or do they got to dig a retention pond on their property?
So typically, how we would interpret this is when it says on a given property, we look at it as a subdivision as a whole, because it'd be really hard for every lot to dig out a detention basin for their own lot. Rather, it's you channel it so it all flows down to one point, and sometimes, and there's requirements for how much you have to contain on lot, and you can release some off lot, and then the city has their stormwater basins that are built into the streets that they require the developer to put in as well. So I think it's more when we say you contain it on your lot, it means when you come to develop as a developer, we'll do the whole overall development. If you have maybe just one lot, you're putting a house on it, we might look at it and say, hey, are you building your house in a weird way that's going to drain it straight onto your neighbor? Don't do that.
Right.
But typically it's a development.
I know you can have a lot, if it naturally was doing that.
You can still allow it to go
which
through.
That's what's the first, sorry, I didn't call that one out. You can't increase in frequency of flow or peak flow to the downstream facilities.
All right. No, I like that. I just thought we were being strict and saying, that's not going to happen.
Any other discussion? I think we're ready for a motion. Wait, okay. A little louder.
Yep. I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed amendments to Section 5-9-105, storm drainage in the Development Code, to update regulations regarding drainage being directed toward the right-of-way.
I'll second that.
Great. Jerry?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Audrey's a yes. Trent?
Yes.
And Deborah?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion has passed. All right, our next item is text amendment and fences, Development Code update. Kelly, we'd like to turn the time over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Do y'all ever get tired of hearing from me? Okay. Another Development Code update, again, legislative, and this is regarding our fence code. So it's Section 3612, which is where we regulate fences, theme walls, screen walls, and retaining walls. As far as prior council direction, if you listened to the last council meeting, maybe you didn't, but just to go over it, on April 18th, there was a communication item regarding our fence ordinance, and there was regarding trail corridors, a council member requested that this be discussed, and then another one was one that was brought from staff, and that's regarding the municipal fencing. So in our discussions, council members directed staff to move forward with an amendment to allow chain link fencing for municipal facilities. And so that's kind of talking like around our wells or pump stations, those type of facilities, or if we have, an example, and I'll show you all a picture later, is at our Hogs Hollow Trail connection that we have up by the PI pond. where we've installed a vinyl-coated chain link fence is another example. And then council members also directed staff to change the requirement for fences adjacent to trail corridors to reduce it from requiring, along our trail corridors, we require fences to be the top 2 feet 55% open, and then the bottom 4 feet can be solid. And we require that on trail corridors that are less than 40 feet wide or not visible from 2 public places, like any place that we deem not safe or not visible to like the public, that we would require that top 2 feet to be 55% open. And the council members directed staff to reduce that to a 30-foot wide corridor rather than 40. And so as far as staff recommendation for what I'm about to go through, we recommend the Planning Commission hold a public hearing after I present and then accept the findings and recommend approval of this proposed amendment. Background, so as y'all could see in the staff report, there are a couple different things that aren't necessarily related to each other, but they're related to this section of code, and so we're kind of just knocking them all out while we're working on this amendment. One being fence height and how we calculate that. There's been confusion amongst staff, developers, residents regarding fence height. I know we talked about this a while back, you may remember, but there were still some pieces that we had contradicting each other, and so we're trying to clarify that and make it very clear how this is measured. I also want to clarify parkway detail fencing is measured differently than what I'm about to show you. In our parkway detail that we're going to work on an update for, we're specifying that that fence height has to be measured from the sidewalk elevation. Also regarding retaining wall height, and I'll show you that, essentially the way we regulate maximum height in our development code is off of exposed height, and we've been running into confusion because in International Building Code, they base retaining wall height off of from bottom of footing. And so we're also clarifying that differentiation in our code. And then also the direction from council we're addressing, so regarding the trail corridors and municipal fencing are 2 changes in this amendment. And then theme wall regulations, again, something that happened at the April 18th city council meeting. Several residents came regarding the fence along Alpine Highway, it being a theme wall, and essentially in this proposed amendment, we're addressing some concerns that were raised during that meeting, and then y'all can choose whether you think it's necessary to include that or to omit it. So just kind of going over the proposed amendment, we did a little bit of a reorganization, and so these are our main subsections in this section of code. So just one stating that permits are required, and this is regarding to everything that's in this section. And then we have a general section that kind of has these general regulations regarding each of these things. And then you have specific to residential fences, and then we go to theme walls, screen walls, and then retaining walls, and then we have a new section for municipal fencing and retaining walls. So going over to fence height, the way we've adjusted it, this is actually like an existing code, but then we had a couple of other I don't know why we were so confused last time, but we had a couple other ways to measure it on top of this way. And so we're just going back to simplicity and measuring it back to how we were before. Essentially, so fence height shall be measured from the highest point of the finished grade. It sounds confusing as I'm reading it. To the highest point of the fence. Finished grade means the average finished grade of the property within 5 feet of either side, provided that the fence shall not exceed 8 feet in total height along any point as measured from the lower property grade. And then, like I said, fences adjacent to parkway detail are measured differently. And so this is an example of what that means. And so you basically, from this 5 feet on either side of where the fence is, you come up with an average grade between the 2 properties. And obviously this is specific to when you have different grades on each side. Obviously, if it's flat, you're going to have a 6-foot fence, no issues, but we deal with this a lot more often than you think, where people are on the higher property and are like, but I want a 6-foot fence, and this fence is 3 feet tall when it's on my property line. And so this is where you come up with this average grade. So the higher property can feel like they have some privacy, and then the lower property isn't getting something that looks like it's 10 feet tall on their side. And so that's why we put this maximum of 8 feet, where we recognize there's a difference in elevation, but we're not allowing you to go taller than 8 feet measured from the lower property.
What if the lower property wants the higher fence?
What if it's the lower property that wants the higher
Like if it
fence?
ends up being a low fence and the upper guy walks over and can just stare down at him. And so
Well,
the lower guy wants
technically, like all across the board, we have a 6-foot fence allowance. People can't just put in an 8-foot fence because they want to, because technically if you made that argument, we could
Gotta at
allow
least be a
8-foot
6-foot.
fences places. Yeah, they would just,
So the minimum is a 6-foot.
say that one more time.
The minimum height of a fence is 6 feet.
No, maximum.
That's the max.
That's the maximum.
So it could end up being 3 feet.
Yeah, if someone wanted to install a 1-foot fence, they could install a 1-foot fence. I don't know why they would, but yeah, they'd be allowed to do that. Obviously, with pools, we have different requirements, but okay, I'm going to move on to the next one, and then we can go back to that if y'all have questions. Next one was regarding the trail corridors. Like I said, council is wanting it to be reduced to 30 feet wide rather than 40 for that top 2 feet, 55% open. These are just a couple examples. This is over in Canterbury North. This is what a 20-foot trail corridor looks like. All these residents have met the requirements of having that top 2 feet, 55% open, or some have fully open style fences. So this kind of shows how it makes the corridor feel more open or safer for kids that are walking on the trails alone. And then this is an example of a 30-foot wide corridor. Obviously, these residents still have met that requirement because at the time that was the code. It still is the code currently. But this is what the council is expressing, that they feel comfortable with it being 6 foot tall solid on each side. And then anything less than that would have to have that open style on top. And then the next is regarding theme walls. Like I said, this was as a result of the discussions at that council meeting regarding the Alpine Highway fence. And so the proposal is that, we require that all theme walls be located on private property and owned by the owner of such private property or by a homeowners association unless the city agrees otherwise by way of a condition of approval during the development review process or recorded agreement. Issue with Alpine Highway fence, there's been confusion and back and forth regarding who owns it. Regarding all the other theme walls, like in Ridgeview and everywhere, it's very, everyone knows, as in it's well understood that it's either HOA owned or owned by the private property owner. The city is not going to maintain any of those walls, but obviously that Alpine Highway fence was installed 30 years ago, and a lot of people had different stories and understandings, and so that's where we're trying to eliminate the confusion with future development. And then also adding a section regarding maintenance and reconstruction of the theme walls. So obviously they're privately owned, but we as a city would still like to regulate the fact that it is a theme wall and there's a theme wall required on that road, because our current code only requires that developer install a theme wall, and then we don't have any verbiage regarding what happens after that. And so the proposal is to add the owner of the theme wall, that private property owner, or HOA, shall maintain the theme wall in reasonably good and safe condition, and then any reconstruction of the theme wall shall conform to the theme wall design approved as part of the development review process, unless a different design is approved by the city council. And that was meant to some of the concerns that were brought up with the Alpine Highway fence and people reconstructing or fixing it was, okay, are we going to get this kind of piece together, not consistent looking fence right on Alpine Highway? And so again, this would be applicable to future development, but it's just to remove that concern. Obviously, residents can replace it. They're expected to fix it if there are holes in it because it's a theme wall. But it's just that they couldn't just remove it to remove it or put it in as wood just because they wanted to, if that makes sense.
Kelly, may I ask a question? So what about over time? We used to be okay with vinyl. We used to be okay with all of these old grandfathered fences. Like just opposite me on 6000 West, we've got this rather unsightly vinyl fence, and it's falling apart. It looks like a dog's breakfast. So what this language is saying is that you have to go back. If I was the property owner, it's basically saying I have to fix it and I have to put in a presently non-compliant fence, but one that is compliant with what was approved, a month of Sundays ago.
Like, are you saying if 20 years from now we change the approved materials now?
Well, that applies as well as historically. So, for example, let's take the folks over here where they had a storm in a teacup at City Council about the theme wall fence.
Yes.
So currently we do or do not allow that type of fence.
We do not allow wood as a theme wall fence. We do not allow vinyl either.
So then if I'm reading this as, any one of the people that I know over there, I would read it saying, okay, so I'm on the hook to fix this fence, and what you're telling me to do is to fix it in a way that is non-compliant with our current fence code, but consistent with what was approved 10 or 15 years ago. The same thing would apply to chain link fences, from yesteryear, vinyl fences from yesteryear. And I'm not trying to be cute or clever.
No,
it's just as I read that, I thought, oh, blast it. Do we want to perpetuate the vinyl or chain link or the scruffy-looking wood fences? Because a lot of the argument of the probably 30 or 40 people that were here at City Council was to say, it just looks unsightly. Can't we put in something that looks attractive? Mm-hmm. And what we're doing now is saying to them, you got to pay for it, and by the way, it's going to look awful in about 10 years. Because it's not really and we've realized that over time, oh dear, some of these materials aren't quite as nice as we thought they would be.
Right. I think the issue, obviously, yes, we're trying to, the purpose of this amendment is to solve this with future development. Unfortunately, just adopting this now isn't going to change what they're allowed to do, right?
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to be difficult. It just suddenly jumped out
it's a very
like,
good point.
Oops.
It's a struggle that we've had because, and what was from that discussion with the council is what can you reconstruct it as? Can you build it to a current theme wall, or do you maintain to the previous one? This was our suggestion, was you keep it the same unless the council says otherwise. And that was our thought. But if you have a better idea, love a recommendation.
Yeah, this is a tough issue. And then who decides what maintain in good condition is defined as?
City. Us, staff,
okay.
I guess.
All right, so I just drive along and say, that's ugly, fix it.
Yes.
Okay.
I was just going to add to your comments. It makes sense. Well, what I heard you say is if we don't like what it's looking like and we want to change it to a modern, we have that ability. We have to get approved by City Council. But to tell somebody,
the residents.
But to tell somebody you're going to follow the law or the ordinance now, but we also reserve the right to tell you have to gold plate that in 20 years with the current law at that time. They know what they're getting into when they start, but if that's wide open, they don't know what they're getting into, and that would be quite a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and Trent, the challenge is that a lot of these people are actually, it's the null hypothesis to what you just said. They want to make it look better. They want to put on one of these beautiful concrete stamped lovely fences because they don't like the ugly wood thing, and so visually it's a cosmetic thing, but then also from a maintenance point of view.
Oh, sure.
The City Council used this expression, one and done, where you install it and hopefully it's good for 50 years or whatever.
or until it's out of style and people
Those.
don't like it.
Yes.
But then they put the new one in, nice wall, and it's inconsistent with the rest of the fencing, and it looks, and how long will it take for everybody to do it is another 20 or 30 years, so.
Yeah, and a good example is down on 6800 West as you drive down to Costco by the Equestrian Centre, where you have this, it's just been done a few months ago, and it's really, I think, unattractive because it's this higgledy-piggledy mishmash of things.
Are we ready for a motion?
All right. Are we ready to make a motion?
Oh, shoot. I didn't finish my.
Oh, please.
I'm so sorry.
You're done, Kelly. Sorry, you've had your 3 minutes.
We get it.
Yeah,
We get it.
okay, I'll go through this super quick. Okay, again, regarding the International Building Code and the Development Code discrepancy, International Building Code requires a building permit if a retaining wall is taller than 4 feet measured from bottom of footing. And people get confused with that because in our development code, we base everything off of exposed height. So they think 4 feet exposed, I'm great, and think that they don't need a permit, but they do according to IBC. And so we've made that clarification in this code. And that was my little drawing as far as what exposed height is versus bottom of footing. Thank you. And then for municipal fencing, our verbiage was that fencing for Highland City may be chain link. Fences and retaining walls for Highland City may deviate from these standards for the benefit of the public and public resources. And so deviate from these standards as in our max height for a retaining wall being 6 feet. When you think of road projects, different projects that we have where we have 12-foot plus retaining walls, Canal Boulevard being an example, it's just making sure that we're still abiding by our code. And then as far as Highland City, fences for Highland City may be chain link, there was discussion about adding vinyl coated chain link, but then it was brought up the fact that our baseball fields, we use just chain link, and it's better for the baseball fields to be just chain link rather than the vinyl coated. And so we just need to say straight up chain link for each of these projects that we bid for and are constructing, like our parks maintenance building, that sort of thing. Like most of those things are all reviewed and approved by the council. And so a lot of these things are going to be situational where the council says, we prefer this to look like this here, but we're okay with it looking like this here. It's giving them the room to make those decisions, but allowing us to also meet our own code, essentially. These are examples of some of our new vinyl coated chain link that we've installed recently. This is over by Ridgeview, and then this is that Hogs Hollow fence that we just installed recently with this is a soft trail, but that dirt trail that the Lone Peak Bike Team helped us install.
Is the bottom secured somehow or anything? Is it buried or?
Say that one more time.
Is the bottom of the fence secured or is it just a piece of wire? That's usually the part that curls up.
It looks just like wire, yeah. Sorry.
How did we as the city do this if we were breaking the ordinance?
It's public facilities.
Sorry, wrong question.
You can go.
Please
You can
continue.
talk to that.
Because the city just did it, and who's going to enforce the city's ordinance but the city? That's kind of how it comes. This is kind of ending the fact that the city will generally do what it feels is best. It just says, let's just make an exception rather than granting exceptions on a case-by-case basis without ever stating that. Just build it into the city's code that the city is unique, mostly because it's a resource management thing.
That's the same with the retaining walls.
Yes.
The city can go higher, but the public can't.
I mean, if you wouldn't want the city to have to buy 100 feet for a road in order to step back retaining walls for a roadway improvement, because that would just be a lot of work for the city, which is tax dollars, so.
Yeah, and then
All
I'm
right,
done.
thank you.
Yep.
Are we ready?
Oh, public hearing though, too.
I started with the public hearing, I thought. Okay. All right. Let's open this up for a public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to make comment. We close the public hearing, and Commissioners, is there anyone who would like to make a motion? I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed amendment to Section 3-612 of the Development Code relating to municipal fencing, how fence height is measured, and adjusting fence design requirements adjacent to trail corridors.
I second that.
Okay. Jerry?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes?
Audrey's a yes. Trent? And Deborah?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion has passed. We're now to Planning Commission and staff communication items. Accessory dwelling units. Chris, were you going to talk about that?
I want to go home, actually. Well, all of you have seen the email, and maybe, Deborah, you haven't had access to it. Okay, but the concept being, I think that we should, unless someone has wild disagreement, that we should do this later at another Planning Commission meeting. But the stuff in the email is pretty self-explanatory, where we create whatever the polite word is, in-law apartments or granny flats or something. Our current code does not permit you to have a separate dwelling that is detached from the home. And I mean, I've spoken to a bunch of people. It seems sensible, particularly given our demographics in the area where people have pretty close, how would you put it? It's basically the religious organization in the local residential area where they've lived for 30 or 40 years. They don't want to keep up a 1 acre or 3 or 5 acre property. And then they move in their 70s or 80s and they lose all kind of social connection to the local community. And I'm not sure that that's what we really want, A. And B, it's probably also a wise way to address some of this rather bizarre state mandated low-income housing or moderate housing, whatever they want to call it, but still retaining the core character of Highland, where we have, like, just for me as an example, we live on 5 acres. If Jackie and I get, old and decrepit, which we will someday, I think it would be sad to move away from a place that we've lived in for 40, 50 years and to go to a brand new place and have to establish all of these connections. What if we had a situation where we could have a limited dwelling, 1,000, or I don't even know what the appropriate square footage restrictions would be, but where we could sell our home to our children. They may not want to be that close to us, though. And then we move into this kind of granny flat or in-law apartment that is on the premises. The economic burden and also the physical burden is distributed to kind of successive future generations, but we retain this community of people that we've grown to love for decades, plus doing this end run around the state legislature. So I don't know, that was just the high level. What it actually means and what the restrictions are about square footage size, separate meters, blah, blah, all the rest of that, I don't actually have a brilliant idea.
I did want to say that I love it. It's already happening, I think. Mm-hmm. And to make it legitimate and accounted for in the accounting for the low-income housing mandate that we've been given. And it is a solution for a built-out bedroom community with large lots. So that's the fix that we're in, yet we're getting threatened by the state. So I think it makes sense.
Flagstaff had this identical, and property values are really high in Flag, so we had the same impossible mandate from the state. And so we introduced, we called it workforce housing, granny flats, legacy housing. And it was restricted first to 600 feet and then went to 1,000 feet. And then one of the 2 units had to be owner occupied. You couldn't rent them both out. Yeah. And it was a huge hit. And we did it on 7,000 square foot lots. And I don't suggest we do that. But on an acre lot or 2 acre lots, I currently have a guest house on my property, which is 2 acres. My father-in-law lived there for 2 years. We had the separation, but we could take care of him. He passed away a week ago. And when Frankie and I get older, like you said, my son Kyle can move into the main house, we can move into that house and not leave the connections. As you get older, you know, we've been there 15 years now. You don't want to go make new connections at a retirement facility or whatever.
And that's something that our area lacks. We don't have those facilities close.
You could move into that and rent the house out for $5,000-$6,000, travel. I mean, it's a great. Now, we've seen good and bad. Renting out both units is bad because then it just turns into this rental frenzy. But when you have to have owner occupancy of one of the units, I called it legacy housing because to me in Highland it would be legacy housing where as you get older you can stay there, the kids could move here, and it just kind of rotates because a lot of people hang on to these properties regardless. And so I've had a lot of experience in it. I've designed a lot of them, and they're really great. I've seen, and it knocks the affordable housing thing out of the park because it takes all these 2 acre, 1 acre, you know, maybe we limit it to half-acre lots to have these, and you can do it size-wise, you know, the smaller your lot, the smaller the unit, whatever. But, I mean, you just opened up a city that has no property for affordable housing, and that counts.
And you can flip it the other way, not just legacy, but newly married kids that you do not want in your home. And that don't want to be in your home.
My son got back from his
but
mission.
can't afford housing prices everywhere else and have a reasonable rent and lower that crazy rent level back down to a reasonable, affordable income housing.
I have a little bit of issue, of course, the new kid on the block here. I like the idea. I love the idea when you have at least minimum of an acre if it's going to be something small, you know, a small house. But there's a lot. See, like I said, I was on some of these committees 100 years ago. This has been an issue since we became a city. It's been an issue. And in the beginning, everything was, I mean, our first master plan, it was beautiful. Everything was lovely. The city loved it. All that kind of stuff was happening. We recognized that we didn't have any senior, you know, everything was these big homes and lots and such. And a lot of people here, many of them had 5, 10 acres and 20 at the time and more. And they had the money to move, but they didn't want to go anywhere else. We were going to build senior homes, nice senior homes. Well, but that affordable, 1 story for all the elders that don't want to leave Highland. We ended up building those duplexes, triplexes, those things over just east of here. I'm going towards my house. And they're lovely.
Toscana.
They're one level, but they have a steep basement. They have high ceilings. They were $500,000 almost at the time of sale, $450,000 for some of them. I didn't know a senior that wanted to live in them because they were the stairs. There was, you know, one level with the basement, and the basement was so usable and finished, and it was, you know, they couldn't get down the stairs. High ceilings, the heat in the winter goes up, you know, the whole thing. So that's lovely. There's a lot of people living there that can live that way, and that's lovely because they're nice. Then we decided, okay, we still need the housing for the elderly that, you know, can't afford $500,000 and that don't want to go downstairs, and for our young marrieds, you know. So Tuscany came in. So Tuscany's lovely. I like it. I'm kind of the European descent thing. I like it. But very narrow staircase, 3 stories high. You know, I don't know. I mean, a senior that wanted to couldn't. A senior. I'm not a senior in this case. But when people are ready to leave their home, you know, that they're ready for something they can live in. Well, that kind of worked for the young marrieds and babies, the one till you have, you know, 2 children, and then you have to move out there so small, but that's a different thing. And I'm just kind of seeing us going downhill, to be honest. We've talked about a nice senior living, not necessarily assisted and all that, but senior, there's all kinds now around, actually, where there's you know, you just live there, and there's low maintenance, maybe HOA type stuff, whatever. But we're building all this other stuff here with levels and all that again. It's nice if you have an acre or 2 or 3 or 5, to be able to live there forever. I've been here over 30 years. I have a half acre. I'm on a hill. I love my property. I'm going to be there as long as I can be, but I have no place to put a smaller unit unless it's 300 square feet, and on it. And I know my kids don't want to live in Highland. They're city and off on their own things. So I'm concerned about this because we really have to have strict rules if we did something like this, I think. And I'm all for it. If we have smallest amount of property you can have is. Largest house you can build is.
Yes.
Like when you say it's this X amount of space.
It would be a percentage based on
and one
lot
definitely
size.
owns to live in one and all that kind of stuff and maintain, and they have to be strict rules, because I can just see that becoming a mess.
Parking as well.
Well, wait a minute.
Parking, cars everywhere. That's what we have.
We already do it.
Well, and the parking's a pain where we
we
do it.
already do it, we just don't allow it to be detached.
I know.
The only difference here is we're allowing it to be detached,
Yeah.
because it's more pleasing versus just slapping
But-
on a
oh,
house,
yeah.
putting a
And
breezeway or putting them in the
should have
basement.
their own driveway or whatever. Because I know we do it now with the homes, but now in my neighborhood, just a little bit, the older neighborhood, just east of Highland Elementary and west of here, the first one that came. And we've got 6 cars next door. We've got 8 cars, because they have their mother-in-law or their kids living in the basement or whatever else. So there's, and we're not enforcing any of that. And I just hate to see us making more things until we're enforcing the things that we have.
Yeah.
So
We also have
bandwagon.
to deal with that we're now being forced to do.
But I do love the idea, so.
And
Anyway.
I do think along with those, we need to include parking on the property has to be on premise. So the problem is we have big families and everyone thinks their 16-year-old needs a car. So that's a cultural problem.
But it's there.
Yeah, I'm very much in support of this. It's something I've been looking at to try to do for years. It's actually caused me to look outside of living in Highland because I can't do it here. So I would be very much in favor of doing it. I do like the options that everybody talked about. And Jerry, if we had some examples or anything that you might pull from your experience, I would love if you could share that with us, that we could look at that. But several months ago, I talked to you, Kelly, about the survey that we're doing with the city. When is that going to be, and are we going to be able to get a question like this added in that so we can get some early community response?
With it based on property size.
Yeah, some
Do
kind
it in
of
the
rough.
city survey.
Yeah, the survey's doing October.
I
It's
think
fall.
it is
We shifted
October.
it to fall this year.
So that, I was going to mention that as far as the moderate income housing element that y'all just updated based on the state requirements. One of the implementation plan measures that was approved regarding ADUs was including in our city survey a question regarding detached ADUs and kind of giving the Planning Commission, City Council an idea of, or to gauge the resident support of those and then make a decision based on that support. Obviously, if y'all are wanting to research and start that process before then, you're welcome to. I would encourage working with council members on that as well, if you want to move forward before the survey. But yeah, either or. I'm like, I'll do whatever you guys request us to do as staff.
That's what I was hoping, is that we could get that survey sooner and we could work on this sooner. Probably not an option.
Probably not. Just because it's our city survey that we send out annually. So it's all very timed out, and we have employees that do that specifically.
But this does give us time to come prepared, to
Yeah.
do all the different things we're into and see what works when it's time.
And you guys are all invited. Just call me to come to my house. No, mine was grandfathered 70 years ago, so I'm not. It was county when it was done. But you guys can come see exactly how it works on a 2-acre lot.
Wait, so you don't have a 66-foot wide driveway, Jerry? I'm joking. That was a bad joke.
But we do have to consider people who don't have 1 and 2 and 3 and 5 acres, and they don't want to leave Highland either. So we need,
but
not
if-
on their property. No, but that's my point. We're going to have to, if we're going to do something like that, we really need to accommodate the rest of the city. They can stay here with whatever senior living, not, something that's like,
A smaller lot is easier to stay on. You got 2 acres,
yeah.
there's no
Well,
way I
not
could.
my lot. I'm on a hill. I'm the only house on the hill. But I have that beautiful view of the mountains because we look right over everybody's roofs. But eventually my husband's not going to be pushing the mower up and down. We can hire someone for that, but he's busy in his yard, so.
Okay, so this is something we can meet on, talk about, email back and forth, and come up with some ideas. And her email's now going to be available on the website? The city? Your city email? Wonderful.
Oh, yeah, I'll update the website to include yours on there.
Yes, on the
Right.
website, so we have access to it.
I thought the planning commission email is already updated. I'll double check on that, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then we have May 2nd, City Council work session and regular meeting at 6. May 16, City Council work session and regular meeting at 6. May 23rd, Planning Commission meeting at 7. And June 6th, City Council, 7 o'clock, City Hall. So, thank you. Any motions to close?
I make a motion to go home, please.
I second that.
Aye.
Yes.
Jerry, Chris, Audrey, Trent, and Deborah, yes.
What's happening on the 23rd of May? Nothing in school. Everyone's going to be here, right?